For nearly 1,000 years, one bloodline has worn the crown of England. But that story is not one of peace. It begins in 1066 with a French duke who killed a king and took his crown by force. Since then, kings and queens have risen and fallen. Some were ruthless tyrants who ruled by fear. Others were visionary reformers who reshaped a nation. There were golden ages and dark ones. Heroes who stood strong and heirs who walked away from it all. From bloody battles to golden jubilees. This is the story of the British monarchy in under 15 minutes. From William the Conqueror, who built England through battle, to William Rufus, whose reign ended mysteriously in a hunting accident, Henry I, a ruthless administrator, and Stephen, whose chaotic reign split England in civil war. Henry II created common law, but clashed fatally with the church. Richard the Lionheart fought crusades, but barely saw England. His brother John, cruel and unpopular, was forced to seal Magna Carta. Henry III faced rebellion. Edward I conquered Wales. Edward II lost Scotland. Edward III launched the 100 Years' War. Richard II was overthrown. Henry IV seized power. Henry V won at Agincourt. Henry VI lost France and his mind. Edward IV restored order. Edward V vanished. Richard III fell at Bosworth. Henry VII stabilized England. Henry VIII reshaped religion with 6 wives. Edward VI died young. Mary I returned to Rome and burned heretics. Elizabeth I ruled gloriously for decades. Stuarts began strong with James I, but Charles I lost his crown and head. Cromwell briefly erased monarchy. Charles II restored it flamboyantly. James II was ousted peacefully by William and Mary's glorious revolution. Queen Anne united Britain. George I and George II spoke German more than English. George III lost America. George IV spent lavishly. William IV paved the path to modernity. Victoria's reign defined an empire and industrial era. Edward VII brought style. George V survived World War I and renamed the family Windsor. Edward VIII abandoned duty for love. George VI guided Britain through World War II's darkness. Elizabeth II reigned longer than any, adapting tradition to modernity. And now Charles III, taking the throne as Britain faces questions of monarchy's future. October 14th, 1066. The fields near Hastings were stained with blood. William of Normandy, known as William the Conqueror, had crossed the English Channel, determined to claim the crown of England. In one brutal day, he changed the course of history, seizing power through strategy, brutality, and iron will. Under William, England's language, law, and culture transformed forever, laying the foundation of a united English nation. A century and a half later, royal tyranny reared again. King John, harsh and ruthless, squeezed taxes from nobles and peasants alike, sparking anger and rebellion. In June of 1215, at Runnymede, angry barons forced the king's hand. The Magna Carta, meaning Great Charter, was sealed. This was unprecedented, royal power bound by law. Magna Carta didn't just check the king's power, it became the cornerstone of modern justice and human rights, echoing through centuries into modern democracies worldwide. After Magna Carta, Henry III clashed fiercely with rebellious nobles, barely holding on to power through civil unrest. Edward I crushed rebellions and conquered Wales, building mighty castles, firmly securing England's western borders. But his son, Edward II, suffered humiliating defeat in Scotland, decisively losing at Bannockburn to Robert the Bruce. Edward III sought glory, igniting the 100 Years' War with France, bringing fleeting victories but long-lasting hardship. Finally, Richard II's unstable reign collapsed into rebellion, plunging England into chaos, ending Plantagenet control. In the 15th century, England bled from within. 2 rival families, Lancaster and York, both descended from Edward III, both claiming the throne. The war wasn't just fought on battlefields, but in marriages, betrayals, and beheadings. Kings came and went, some as young as 12. Armies turned on their own commanders. Nobles changed sides by the hour. By the end, England was exhausted, and York's final king, Richard III, lay dead on the battlefield. From the ashes, a new dynasty rose, the Tudors. Henry VII claimed the crown through conquest and marriage, uniting the warring houses. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who changed England's soul. By severing ties with the Catholic Church just to divorce his first wife, Henry didn't just reshape religion. He shattered centuries of loyalty to Rome, created the Church of England, and unleashed a storm of reform and persecution that would define British identity for generations. Henry VIII's son, Edward VI, took the throne as a boy. He advanced Protestant reforms, but died at just 15. Mary I, his half-sister, reversed it all, restoring Catholicism with fire and fear, earning the name Bloody Mary. Then came Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. Brilliant, bold, she ruled alone for 44 years, defeating the Spanish Armada and ushering in England's golden age. When she died without an heir, the throne passed north. Her cousin, James I of Scotland, united the English and Scottish crowns, but brought new tensions. His son, Charles I, ignored Parliament, raised taxes, and claimed divine right. And England marched towards civil war. By 1642, England stood divided, not by foreign armies, but by its own king. Charles I believed in divine right, ruled by the will of God, not the will of Parliament. He dissolved Parliament, levied taxes without consent, and ruled alone, until the people had enough. Parliament fought back, with words at first, then with swords. For nearly a decade, England tore itself apart. Families were split, churches became battlegrounds. The Crown and Parliament waged war across countryside and city alike. In 1649, after years of bloodshed, Parliament did the unthinkable. They put a king on trial. Found guilty of tyranny and treason, Charles was sentenced to death. On a cold January morning, he stepped onto a scaffold outside the banqueting house in Whitehall. He addressed the crowd calmly, forgave his enemies, then laid his head upon the block. With a single stroke, the blade fell. For the first time in English history, a reigning king was executed by his own people. The monarchy's divine shield shattered, and the idea of government by the people took root. After a decade without a king, England wanted stability. In 1660, Charles II returned from exile to restore the monarchy, with charm, flair, and few illusions about power. But his brother, James II, brought controversy. He was openly Catholic in a still Protestant nation, and tried ruling like a king of old. Fearing another absolutist monarch, Parliament acted swiftly. In 1688, they invited William of Orange, James's Protestant son-in-law, and Mary, James's own daughter, to take the throne. It was a revolution without war. No bloodshed, no civil war, just one king out and two in. And with them came something more lasting, a constitutional monarchy, where Parliament, not the Crown, held ultimate power. After the Glorious Revolution, Britain's monarchy ruled by consent, not command. Queen Anne died childless, but united the kingdoms of England and Scotland into Great Britain. She passed the crown to a distant cousin, George I of Hanover. He spoke little English, but paved the way for Parliament and the Prime Minister to take charge. Then came George III, who would rule for 60 years. Under him, Britain lost its American colonies, a humiliation that reshaped imperial strategy and weakened royal influence. Plagued by mental illness and political strife, he became both a symbol of national endurance and of decline. His son, George IV, ruled with scandal, lavish palaces, forbidden marriages, and a coronation from which he banned his own wife. William IV, known as the Sailor King, tried to stabilize the throne, but real power had moved to Parliament. By 1837, when Victoria ascended the throne, the monarchy had survived betrayal, bankruptcy, and revolution, ready for a queen to redefine it. She ruled for more than 60 years. When Queen Victoria took the throne in 1837, Britain was a rising industrial power. By the time she died in 1901, it was the largest empire the world had ever seen. Under Victoria, Britain laid railways across continents, launched steamships to all corners of the globe, and held sway over a quarter of the Earth's population. To many, this was an age of progress. Telegraphs, factories, great exhibitions, British innovation at the center of the world. But empire has two faces. Behind the splendor were systems of exploitation. Colonized nations were drained of wealth, ruled without consent, and forced to adopt British customs, laws, and language. The British flag flew high, but it often silenced the voices beneath it. Victoria reigned from Buckingham Palace, but her crown spanned Africa, India, the Caribbean, and beyond. Her name still echoes in cities, railways, rivers, and in the complex legacies left behind. After Victoria's long reign, her son Edward VII brought style and diplomacy back to the monarchy, modernizing its image and connecting royals across Europe. But peace was short-lived. In 1910, his son George V inherited a divided continent. Just 4 years later, the world went to war. During World War I, George stood with his people, visiting troops, cutting palace costs, and publicly rejecting his German roots. In 1917, amidst growing anti-German sentiment, he made a symbolic break, renaming the royal family from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. The name stuck. So did the idea of a more relatable, resilient monarchy. In 1936, Britain faced a crisis unlike any before, not of war or politics, but of the heart. King Edward VIII, charming and modern, shocked the world when he chose love over the crown. Abdicating to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee the government refused to accept as queen. For the first time in British history, a monarch stepped down by choice. The public was stunned. The throne passed to his younger brother, George VI, a shy, reluctant man with a stammer and a heavy crown now on his head. Just 3 years later, World War II broke out, and Britain looked to its quiet king. George VI stayed in London during the Blitz. He walked among the rubble. He visited bombed neighborhoods. He rallied his people, not with grand speeches, but with quiet courage. He proved that the monarchy, stripped of power, could still lead by presence, by example, and by loyalty to the people. In 1952, at just 25 years old, Elizabeth II became queen after the sudden death of her father, George VI. She pledged a lifetime of service and kept it. Her coronation in 1953 was the first to be televised, watched by millions across the world. In the early years of her reign, she balanced ancient tradition with a rapidly modernizing Britain, navigating decolonization, shifting roles for women, and the birth of the television age. Elizabeth II reigned for more than 70 years, the longest in British history. She met with presidents, endured protests, weathered wars, and witnessed the digital age reshape the world around her. Through it all, she rarely wavered. To some, she was distant. To many, she was dependable, a monarch not of power, but of presence. She endured family scandals, divorces, tabloid storms, public doubt, and still, she remained the constant, a living symbol of service over self. From the Cold War to COVID, from Princess Diana to Prince Harry, Elizabeth carried the weight of a changing monarchy with grace that spanned generations. Her Platinum Jubilee celebrated her reign. Just months later, the world mourned her death. When she passed in 2022, it wasn't just the end of a reign, it was the end of an era, a bridge to a time most of us only know through her. She wasn't just the Queen, she was continuity. Now, the crown passes to King Charles III, a monarch shaped by decades of waiting, by scandal, by service, and by change. He inherits a world far different from the one his mother ruled. Global, digital, and increasingly divided over what monarchy means today. Some question its cost, others, its purpose. But the British monarchy has never been about standing still. It survives because it adapts. It endures because it evolves. The story's not over. The royal family is just turning a new page. Thanks for watching. For more clear, compelling history, subscribe to Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story.